You've laid out a lot of like how OG could be reformed, how ethics in the highest office could be reformed. What are some of those ideas? What do you think needs to happen? And then, yeah, and then maybe your assessment of how Biden's doing when it comes to his own conflicts of interest in his cabinet.
Yeah. So I truly believe that the most important thing is something that people may not think of as government ethics, but I want to make a quick case that it is.
Mhm.
And that's the voting rights stuff. I think we absolutely need to protect the freedom of every single person in America who's an adult to vote. And the reason I view that as a corruption issue is that when you think about the definition of corruption, it's the misuse of entrusted power for private gain. There's two things wrong with that in the context of voter suppression. One is the power is not entrusted to you; you took it. If you're suppressing people's votes, if you're making obstacles for some people when they go to vote that other people don't have to face.
Sure.
I typically have driven up, parked in front of the voting uh, polling site, gone in, voted, and come out in 5 minutes. This midterm election in Virginia was the only exception in my life to that. But I watch on TV people standing in line 8 and 12 hours, and that's a choice. That's a choice by somebody in power to make people in certain zip codes have a harder time voting, and they're doing that targeting racial groups in particular. Um, so it's not entrusted. And second of all, the power isn't being used for all of us. It's being used for a subset of us. And that is then the equivalent of private gain. So as far as I'm concerned, if you're not protecting the right to vote, you are running a corrupt government, period.
Well, then everyone's condemned. That's just
Yeah.
look at our gerrymandered system here.
Yeah.
And our like a non-representative government. I mean, everyone's sort of got, like egg on their face on that. But I guess maybe more, I do want to talk about that. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting because of the way that Biden is focused, yes, on infrastructure first, seemingly wanting to paint over what, it's just sort of like, let's move forward, let's not look back. I think he's much more invested in that as almost a way to neutralize some of the rampant sort of like foaming right wingers who somehow think he's not president. And it's like, I don't think you're ever going to neutralize them, even if you build a bridge in their town.
Yeah.
They'll just drive over it with their monster trucks and hanging signs that say, let's go Brandon or something lame.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I get that,
Yeah.
obviously if the sanctity of the vote isn't protected, like what the hell are we doing? But I think on the other hand, that's how I feel about, if there isn't a government office or agency, if there isn't accountability for even someone like the president who you think is, by their very nature, somehow we think the president is ethical, but as we know, we've seen that is not the case. But yeah, we can't even get the basic provisions passed that, it kind of reminds me of the climate agreement that's going on right now. Where you're like, yeah, I mean, it's a hope. It's like, we definitely want to not die in a, fiery whatever cataclysm. Exactly. But, but we're just going to probably keep burning fossil fuels. And I feel like it's sort of similar for government ethics. My thing would be if you still have dark money and super PAC money flooding our system, then how the hell are even the candidates who are supposed to vote for legit? But so it goes all different ways. But I guess what, like, maybe more finitely in the executive branch, what do you think needs to change that before we're mostly just norms?
So I think there's a few things there that absolutely need to change. And I have to say, your comment is extremely gratifying to somebody in government ethics, because people have taken to acting like government ethics and anti-corruption efforts are just the stuff of mismanners. Like, oh, well, we should be polite, and also we shouldn't be corrupt. But really, it goes to the heart of things. And when you think about the fact that a majority of people in this country actually don't vote, then the voter suppression is one thing. But then there's all these other people who have completely disengaged because they've given up on the idea that government's working for them and think it's just a bunch of corrupt people helping themselves. So I agree. I think focusing on corruption stuff is really important. I think one of the, and I have some very specific proposals. I think more broadly, though, one of the things that needs to happen is we need a president to recognize that presidents should stop trying to seize more power from the legislative branch. And Trump was terrible about it, but this one's doing it too. And without congressional oversight and without a fast, meaningful way to enforce subpoenas, Congress is toothless, and there goes the primary check on presidents and corruption that you learned about in social studies class in high school. It was a lie. We've all learned there isn't any check on the president if he has allies controlling Congress who aren't willing to rein him in.
Oh yeah, and the Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court. Oh God, I get depressed thinking about this sometimes.
Yeah, no. Let's just leave that for another day. It's been a lot.
But there are a few things that can be done immediately, and that is, and some of it has been in bills that have been proposed. We need new rules for the president. Right now, the conflict of interest law doesn't apply to the president at all. And part of that is because the conflict of interest law is a recusal statute, meaning if you have a conflict, you stay out of a thing. And the thinking is the president really can't stay out of things. Well, I agree with that, but nobody forced the president to be president. So they should sell off any conflicting assets. And that should be a law rather than a norm.
Yeah. And that applies to the cabinet, but not the president themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So the person who's in charge of a department, like the Department of Commerce, has to sell off conflicting financial interest, but the person who's in charge of all the departments doesn't have to. It's insane. It's like the more power you have to do harm, the less responsibility you have.
Oh, he's the CEO.
Yeah, and they act like it's a perk of high office, which it's that's the thinking of dictators, not the thinking of public servants. Obviously, they should also have to release tax returns. There's going to be, and frankly, I think the tax returns shouldn't just be theirs, but any business that they own, because that's where the corruption's going to be hiding.
Oh yeah, I mean, Trump University going bankrupt. I mean, how many things, right? How much, whether it's I mean, and again, he's just the example, but I know there are others, and it's not just him, but he's just the most egregious example. But yeah, like maybe we shouldn't make that dude president, or at least make him comply. But anyway,
Yeah, and some of the other fixes may seem a little focused on Trump, but for crying out loud, if we don't address the last crisis, how are we even going to address the next one that comes up? So we need to ban presidents and their businesses that they own from doing business with the government.
Right.
We need to ban the president's appointees from being in charge of matters affecting the president, like, say, a special counsel investigation of the president. We shouldn't have any presidential appointees interfering in that.
Right. Jeff Sessions recused himself real early on. Remember that dude? Just got booted from the castle.
Yeah. Weirdly, as terrible a person as Jeff Sessions is, he deserves some credit for at least recusing from that, which Bill Barr wasn't willing to do.
No.
I think there are a lot of other things that also could protect government, like doing a better job protecting whistleblowers. And the Project on Government Oversight has made a number of proposals and has worked with a number of members of Congress on ways to strengthen whistleblowers and put some rein in the powers of the president a little bit. Many of these are actually covered in a bill called the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which is going to be reintroduced in Congress pretty soon. And that's an incredibly important bill that strikes at the things presidents do. In fact, one of the things it would do is suspend any statutes of limitation on prosecuting a president, because we know full well a president's attorney general is not going to prosecute him or her.
Yes.
So, although it turns out Merrick Garland isn't much interested in that kind of thing either. So,
No, I mean, again, we're sort of back to returning to normalcy, and so afraid of the idea that somehow the federal government is being used in a partisan way, as if we didn't just witness that for the last 4 years. And so, like, I have problems because I'm of two minds, right? Like, I'm like, absolutely, we need to rein in the powers of the executive branch, especially when it comes to things like war, and the War Powers Resolution Act, etc.
Mhm.
But then you see when Republicans get into office, and the ways they're just like executive action, executive order after executive order. Let's just do it. We'll ask questions later. We'll put it to the courts. Da, da, da. And it worked sometimes for Trump, and it didn't work sometimes for in other instances. But I look at Biden and I'm like, I feel like executive actions and going solo are almost the only way forward around certain things, whether, that is ending student debt, whether that is just saying, no, I'm not going to expand
Mm.
drilling in the Gulf, even though like a court ruled against it. Like, I don't care. Like, we're not expanding drilling in the Gulf. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not advocating unilateral disarmament. As long as presidents have all these powers, it doesn't. My argument is to weaken the presidency, not a president. And
mm,
so, what Biden ought to be doing is supporting bills like the Protecting Our Democracy Act and a number of other things that are pending that would strip presidents, including future presidents, of power to do some of these things. And I'll just give you one really bizarre, interesting example.
mhm.
When Trump extorted Ukraine, what he did was hold up payments of hundreds of millions of dollars to them that Congress had not only authorized but mandated that he spend by giving to them.
Jesus,
Uh,
Jesus.
and
Yeah.
within the government, and I'll try to keep this non-technical, but there's federal appropriations, which is when, for listeners, the Congress awards money to different parts of the government. But even though Congress gets to set limits on what each part of the government can spend, within that, there's some wiggle room, and presidents wiggle around with that through apportionment decisions. And they issue these notices and schedules, but they're not public and they're highly technical and they include footnotes. And Trump included a footnote that said, we're going to hold up on the Ukraine payment that nobody noticed. And it said, but we will still meet the deadline of the end of the fiscal year to spend it. And then a few more notices down the line, they took out the but and stopped promising that they would spend it. And the money expires on September 30th. If he doesn't spend it by then, he has violated Congress's intent and not spent the money. And nobody noticed it. So,
Jesus.
one thing this Congress has tried to do is include in some of these bills provisions that would require the White House to be more transparent about how it's holding up money and to alert Congress quickly whenever a delay occurs to prevent a repeat of the Ukraine extortion. This
Yeah.
White House has opposed it. And their arguments are extremely frivolous and disingenuous. They say, oh, well, it would be too hard to gather that information. Well, I happen to know that there's an internal system that tracks all of this stuff. In fact, it's a whole government only internet on the inside where all agencies feed in data. And we actually used it at OGE to develop a financial disclosure system. So they have all of this at their fingertips, but they're resisting. And the answer why? They don't want to weaken the executive branch. They don't want to give Congress more power to poke around. So that's not a matter of refraining from issuing executive orders. That's a matter of putting lasting limits on presidents with laws going forward that'll apply to the next guy too. But even
Right.
that kind of thing, this administration is opposing for the simple reason that presidents like power.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do it.